The autumn wind swept golden leaves across the worn stone steps of Maplewood National Bank on Commonwealth Avenue, Boston, a city that had seen fortunes rise and crumble, that carried old money in the mortar of its brownstones, and new ambition in the glass towers above its harbor. Daniel Carter stood at the top of those steps and looked at the revolving brass door like a man who had never opened one before. He was 34 years old. He wore a canvas jacket that had been waterproofed once, maybe 3 winters ago. His work boots were the kind that left scuff marks on marble floors. And he knew it. Beside him, his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, pressed her small hand into his and said nothing. She had learned, in the 2 years since her mother died, that some moments required only presence. She was remarkably good at presence. Daniel held a worn envelope against his chest. Not the kind of envelope a man carries into a bank when he means to deposit something. The kind he carries when he is trying to understand something. The kind he found at the bottom of a cardboard box in his late wife's closet, behind a winter coat she would never wear again. He took a breath. He pushed through the door. He said to the first teller he reached, quietly, with the kind of voice a man uses when he is not sure he has the right to ask, "I just want to see my balance." Across the lobby, a woman named Victoria Langston overheard him. She was 41 years old, wore Italian leather heels, and had a portfolio that had made headlines in 3 separate financial publications that quarter. She glanced at him, the canvas jacket, the scuffed boots, the small girl, and she smiled at the colleague beside her. "Balance," she said, low enough not to be rude, just enough to be heard. "That card probably has $20. A short, quiet laugh passed through the small group around her. Daniel heard it. He looked down at Lily, who looked up at him. Neither of them said anything. The teller slid the card into the reader. The screen loaded, and then nothing in that bank was the same again. Boston, Massachusetts, early October. The apartment on Dunmore Street was the kind of place that apologized for itself. The radiator knocked at odd hours, a deep, percussive complaint that Lily had named Harold. The window in the kitchen wouldn't seal against the draft, so Daniel had duct-taped a strip of weather foam along the bottom, and every morning he checked to see if it was still holding. Most mornings it was. He had lived in this apartment for 4 years. He and his wife, Sarah, had moved in when Lily was still an infant. When they believed it was temporary, a stepping stone between the struggling and the stable. The stepping stone had become a foundation. Then Sarah got sick. Then she was gone. And the stepping stone became the whole ground Daniel stood on. He was an HVAC technician. He worked for a small outfit called Reliable Climate Solutions in the South End, a 3-man operation run by a man named Pete Strickland, who paid decent wages and let Daniel adjust his schedule around Lily's school pickup. It was honest work. Daniel was proud of it in the way that a person is proud of something they have to be proud of because the alternative is despair. He was good at it, too. He had a particular patience with systems that others gave up on a tenacity for listening, for finding the intermittent fault in the intermittent machine. Pete said Daniel could diagnose an old unit the way a doctor reads a patient. Not just with instruments, but with intuition built from years of attention. But winter was coming, and with it, the rent increase notice that had arrived in late September. A letter from Dunmore Properties explaining, with bureaucratic warmth, that effective January 1st, the monthly rent on Unit 4B would increase by $320. The letter used the phrase market adjustment, which Daniel had learned was the vocabulary of people who did not need to worry about market adjustments. He had done the math on the back of a grocery receipt. He had done it 3 times, hoping the 3rd time the numbers would cooperate. They didn't. The increase, combined with Lily's after-school care costs and the emergency car repair he'd put on a credit card in August, left him in a region of financial territory that had no name, except not enough. Lily knew something was wrong. Children always do. She didn't know the specific anatomy of her father's worry. She didn't know about the rent notice or the credit card, but she knew his silences had grown longer. She knew he sometimes sat at the kitchen table after she was in bed and just looked at nothing. She had started drawing pictures for him, small, careful drawings of things she thought might make him smile. A dog they didn't own, a house with a garden, a family of 3 with the middle figure slightly taller than the other 2. She left them on the table when she went to sleep. He kept every one of them. On the morning that changed everything, Daniel was doing laundry. It was the kind of mechanical task that invited accidental discovery. He was pulling old clothes from a storage bin in the closet to check if anything of Sarah's could be donated when his hand touched something at the bottom. A shoebox. Inside the shoebox, 3 birthday cards. A small photograph of Sarah at what looked like a picnic. A stub from a concert they had attended in 2016, and a plain white envelope. No name on the envelope, just a sentence, written in Sarah's handwriting on the outside. If things ever get too hard, check this account. His hands went still. Inside, a bank card, the kind issued by Maplewood National. A 4-digit PIN written on a folded slip of paper. No other explanation. No letter, no amount written. Just the card, and the instruction, and the weight of knowing that she had planned for a version of the future where she would not be in it. He sat on the floor of the closet for a long time. Lily found him there 20 minutes later. She sat down beside him without asking. He showed her the card. She looked at it very seriously, the way she examined most things, and said, "Mama had a bank account? I think so. What kind?" "I don't know, sweetheart." A pause. Lily took the card and held it up to the light from the window as if checking it for authenticity. "We should go find out," she said. He looked at her for a moment. She was so much like her mother, that matter-of-fact courage. The calm that came not from ignorance of difficulty but from an unwillingness to be defeated by it. "Yeah," he said. "We should." Maplewood National Bank, Commonwealth Avenue 11, 14A. The bank was the kind of institution that understood its own importance and designed its interior accordingly. The ceiling in the main hall rose 30 feet, with coffered plasterwork painted in cream and pale gold. The floors were Vermont marble, pale gray with veins of white, the kind that absorbed the sound of shoes and returned it as a low, dignified murmur. Every surface communicated the same message. This place knows what it's doing. "Do you?" Daniel walked in holding Lily's hand on his left and the envelope on his right. He took a moment to orient himself. The teller stations were along the far wall, behind a low mahogany counter, staffed by young professionals in pressed shirts and small lapel pins. There were no ropes or crowd control stanchions. This was not the kind of bank that expected crowds. He noticed, almost immediately, that people were looking at him. Not staring, that would have been impolite, and this was a polite place. But there was the brief glance, followed by the calculated non-look, the slight adjustment of posture that communicated awareness without acknowledgement. A man in a charcoal suit near the desk area shifted his briefcase. A woman in a blouse, the color of winter sky, caught his eye and looked quickly at her phone. Lily noticed too. She tightened her grip on his hand, not from fear, but from solidarity. Near the private banking consultation area, a row of glass-walled offices along the right side of the hall, a group of 4 people stood in the easy conversational cluster of those who conducted significant business in this building regularly. At the center of the group was a woman Daniel did not know but would have recognized had he read the financial press, as Victoria Langston. Victoria was the kind of person who entered rooms and altered the atmospheric pressure slightly. She was tall, angular in the way that suggested discipline rather than thinness, with dark hair pulled back in a precise arrangement that looked effortless only to those who didn't understand the effort. She wore a charcoal blazer over a silk blouse, pearl earrings, a watch that cost more than Daniel's car. She was mid-sentence when Daniel walked in, gesturing with one hand to make some point about a quarterly projection, her colleagues nodding in the way colleagues nod when they are listening to someone who controls their professional future. Daniel walked to the nearest open teller station. The teller was a young woman named Patricia, whose nameplate identified her as P. Walsh, Client Services Associate. She had an open, professionally warm expression that was very good at being neutral. "Good morning," she said. "Morning," Daniel said. He set the envelope on the counter. He slid the bank card across. "I just want to see my balance." Something moved through P. Walsh's expression, a fractional pause, a slight recalibration. She looked at the card. She looked at Daniel. She looked at the card again. "Of course, sir." "One moment." She slid the card into the reader. Behind him, Daniel heard a low voice carry across the marble floor. Clear, unhurried, conversationally pitched, but in that particular way that assumes the speaker has the right to be heard wherever they are. "Balance?" the voice said. "That card probably has $20. A small ripple of laughter. Not cruel, or rather, not intentionally cruel. Just the casual cruelty of people who have been comfortable for so long that they have forgotten what it costs to walk into a room where you don't belong. Daniel did not turn around. Lily looked up at him. He met her eyes and gave a slight shake of his head. Not now. Not worth it, and she nodded with the gravity of someone twice her age and returned her attention to the counter. Patricia was still looking at the screen. She had stopped typing. The teller station Elfsiebsen.m. Victoria finished her point about the quarterly projection and accepted the small chorus of agreement from her colleagues with the ease of someone accustomed to agreement. She glanced over toward the teller counter, the man in the canvas jacket, the small girl, the worn envelope on the marble counter, and felt a small, comfortable superiority settle into her shoulders. She had grown up in a house with money. Not vast money, not the kind that arrived in generations, but comfortable money. A father who owned a chain of dental practices in Connecticut. A mother who sat on 2 nonprofit boards. Victoria had taken that foundation and built something impressive on top of it through a genuine combination of intelligence, relentlessness, and a particular skill for identifying undervalued technology companies before the market caught up with their value. She had a reputation for being cold, which she considered an unfair characterization of being precise. She had a reputation for being brilliant, which she considered accurate. She was not a bad person. But she had spent so many years surrounded by people who measured worth in the same currency she did that she had gradually, without noticing, stopped imagining other denominations. The man at the counter looked like someone who had miscounted something. That slight bewilderment of a person standing somewhere they hadn't expected to end up. She felt the comfortable certainty of her earlier assessment. The card probably has $20, maybe $50, and turned back to her colleagues. Then she noticed that Patricia at the teller station had not moved. Patricia was looking at her screen with the expression of a person who has encountered something that does not fit inside a familiar category. She blinked. She leaned slightly forward. She pressed 2 keys and waited. Victoria watched, with the idle curiosity of someone who has no stakes in the outcome, as a second teller, an older man named Gerald, whose nameplate read G. Morrison, Senior Client Associate, walked over and looked at Patricia's screen. Gerald also went still. They exchanged words, too low for the lobby to hear. Gerald picked up the desk phone. He spoke to someone briefly, then hung up. He looked at Daniel. "Sir," Gerald said, "there may need to be some verification on this account." "Is there a problem?" Daniel asked. "Not exactly a problem, sir." Victoria's colleague, a man named Harper, who covered technology investment for the same firm, was saying something about a fund restructuring. Victoria heard approximately none of it. She was watching the teller counter. A woman in a dark navy suit emerged from one of the private offices and walked briskly to the teller station. This was the branch manager, whose nameplate on her office door read Catherine Morell, branch director. Catherine Morell was the kind of person whose job required her to have seen most things and be unshaken by them. She was currently doing an imperfect impression of being unshaken. She asked Patricia to step aside. She sat down. She looked at the screen. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she turned to Daniel Carter and said, with the careful, measured tone of a professional who is choosing her words with unusual deliberateness, "Mr. Carter, would you like to sit down?" Victoria Langston took 3 steps toward the teller counter. She didn't know why. She would ask herself that later. Something in the quality of Catherine Morell's voice, a branch director who appeared to be personally composing herself, had pulled at her attention with a force she hadn't anticipated. Daniel said, "I don't need to sit down. I just want to see my balance." Catherine Morell took a breath and turned the monitor. 11:19 a.m. The entire lobby floor. 8,727 ling arbei yuan. Lucier arme fin. $84,730,215.62. Daniel Carter looked at this number for what felt like a long time. It was, in reality, approximately 4 seconds. He had the sensation of looking at something written in a language he recognized the alphabet of but could not translate. He knew these were numbers. He knew numbers meant money. He knew that the number of zeros in this particular figure exceeded anything he had ever held in his head in relation to his own life. He said, "Is this right?" Catherine Morell said, "We've verified it twice, Mr. Carter." "Yes. This is the balance of the account associated with that card." The lobby had gone quiet. Not silent, the building continued its institutional murmur. Air through vents, the distant sound of a phone, the low hum of financial machinery, but the human noise had ceased. Patricia had stopped typing. Gerald had stopped walking toward the copier. The 3 colleagues of Victoria Langston had stopped their conversation mid-sentence. Victoria herself had stopped 3 feet from the counter and was looking at the monitor she should not have been able to see from that distance, but could, because Catherine Morell, in the moment of turning the screen, had angled it with the unconscious generosity of someone who cannot contain what they are looking at. 8,727 ling arbei yuan locher arme fin. Victoria did not move. She was very good at not revealing things on her face. Years of negotiation had made her expression a professional instrument, but something was happening behind it that she could not entirely suppress. A recalibration. A sequence of assumptions dismantling themselves with the quiet efficiency of structures that discover they have no foundation. Lily looked up at her father. "Daddy," she said, "is that a lot?" Daniel put his hand on the top of her head. He didn't answer right away. He was still looking at the screen. Then he said, "Yes, sweetheart, that's a lot." His voice did not sound like a man who had just discovered he was rich. It sounded like a man who had just discovered something much more complicated than money. Catherine Morell was saying something about account structure, about a trust designation, about verification protocols. Daniel heard the words as a kind of background noise. His mind was somewhere else entirely, in a closet on Dunmore Street, looking at a white envelope with his wife's handwriting on it. If things ever get too hard, she had known she might not make it. She had known, and she had not told him, and she had spent whatever time and whatever energy she had in the final months of her life making sure that he and Lily would be okay. Not okay the way survival is okay. Okay in the deep, structural way, the way that meant Lily could go to any school, that Daniel could breathe without counting every breath. His eyes were burning. He pressed them shut for a moment, breathed through his nose, and opened them again. Across the lobby, Victoria Langston was very still. The private consultation room, 11:45 a.m. Catherine Morell led them to a consultation room off the main lobby, one of the glass-walled offices, but with frosted glass for privacy. There was a round table, 4 chairs, and a tray with water and small paper cups. Lily sat beside her father and examined one of the paper cups with interest, while Catherine explained what she had learned from the account documentation. The account had been opened 6 years ago, when Lily was a newborn. It was structured as an irrevocable trust, with Daniel Carter and Lily Carter as joint beneficiaries, administered by a trust management firm called Anderson Whitfield Associates. The account was not, technically, a savings account with accumulated interest. It was the principle of a trust fund, established by a single, large contribution from a private donor. The donor was identified in the trust documents as Raymond Holt. Daniel did not know the name. He said so. Catherine Morell slid a thin folder across the table. Inside was a single letter, on the letterhead of a law firm, addressed to the trustees and dated 6 years prior. The letter explained, with legal precision, that the trust was being established in honor of the service and sacrifice of Sarah Carter, née Sarah Beckett, who had, without financial expectation or public acknowledgement, donated bone marrow that had saved the life of Marcus Holt, age 8, son of Raymond Holt, in a procedure performed at Massachusetts General Hospital. The letter further explained that Sarah had declined any financial compensation at the time, stating only that she hoped Marcus would have a good life. Raymond Holt, a founder of a cloud infrastructure company called Viridian Technologies, a company that had gone public 3 years later at a valuation that remapped the word substantial, had been unable to accept that answer. He had established the trust quietly, instructing his attorneys to ensure Sarah never knew about it during her lifetime if she preferred not to, but that it exist in full and in perpetuity for the benefit of her family. Sarah had evidently found out. She had not told Daniel. She had kept the card in a shoebox and written a sentence on an envelope and hidden it like a life raft one he would only need to reach for if the sea got rough enough. Daniel sat very still. He read the letter twice. Then he set it on the table and looked at his hands. Lily had stopped examining the paper cup. She was watching her father the way children watch when they understand something large is happening, even if they cannot name it. "What did Mama do?" she asked. Daniel cleared his throat. His voice came out with a texture he hadn't intended. "She helped a little boy when he was sick," he said. "She gave him something of hers so he could get better." Did it hurt? He thought of what he knew about bone marrow donation, the weeks of preparation, the procedure itself, the recovery. He thought of Sarah going to those appointments without telling him, carrying that along with everything else she had been carrying. "Probably a little," he said. "But she did it anyway." Lily thought about this. "That sounds like Mama," she said. Daniel put his hand over his eyes. Catherine Morell had the grace to busy herself with paperwork for a while. The lobby, 5 p.m. Victoria had not left. This surprised her. She had a lunch at 1 o'clock at a restaurant on Newbury Street. A working lunch, portfolio discussion, the kind of meeting that moved money. She had every reason to leave. Her colleagues had gone, with glances back at the frosted glass of the consultation room and the elevated murmur of people who had witnessed something they couldn't fully categorize. Victoria had stayed. She told herself it was because she was waiting for Catherine Morell, with whom she had her own account relationship to discuss. This was technically true. It was not the complete truth. The complete truth was that the $20 comment was sitting in her chest in a way she couldn't dislodge, and the habit of sitting with discomfort, until she understood it was one of the few personal disciplines she applied as rigorously to herself as to her work. When Daniel and Lily emerged from the consultation room, Daniel had clearly been crying. Recently, and not extensively, the kind of crying a person does when they have fought it back, and then permitted a small, controlled release, and then fought it back again. His eyes were slightly red. His jaw was set with the particular firmness of a man recomposing himself. Victoria stepped forward. She was not someone who did this. She was not someone who crossed a banking lobby to speak to a stranger she had casually belittled 20 minutes ago. But she was crossing the floor before she had fully decided to do it, and when she arrived in front of Daniel Carter, she found that the prepared neutrality she usually carried had not made the trip. "Mr. Carter," she said, "my name is Victoria Langston. I owe you an apology." He looked at her. He was not hostile. She might have preferred hostile, might have been able to navigate hostile more easily. He was simply looking at her, with dark eyes that had recently been wet and were now dry and patient. "For what you said." He said it without accusation, just clarity. "Yes." She held his gaze. She had learned, in years of difficult rooms, that an apology delivered without direct eye contact was not an apology. I made an assumption about you, and I made it out loud, and it was unkind. I'm sorry. He was quiet for a moment. It's okay, he said. 3 words. Said without edge. She got the sense he had made a decision not to carry it, and that the decision had been made before she ever spoke to him, that he had long practiced with the particular kind of dismissal she had offered. This bothered her more, not less. Lily had been observing this exchange with the focused attention she brought to things she found genuinely interesting. Now she looked up at Victoria and said, "Are you the lady who laughed?" Victoria breathed in. "Yes," she said. Lily considered this. "It's okay," she said, with the magnanimous certainty of someone who has been freshly reminded that the world holds unexpected things. Daddy cried a little, but in a good way. Something loosened in Victoria's chest. Not fully, there was a tightness there that she recognized would take longer, but something. "She sounds like she was someone remarkable," Victoria said. Daniel looked at her for a moment. Not evaluating, not guarding. Just looking. The way a person looks at a statement they are deciding whether to accept. "She was the most remarkable person I've ever known," he said. And she didn't think so. That was part of it. Victoria Langston had no response to this that was adequate. So she said nothing. And somehow that was the right thing. Cabot Street Cafe, near Boston Common, 12:40 p.m. Victoria's first instinct, after the apology, had been to leave. She had done what needed doing. She was now free to resume her calendar. But she was walking toward the door when she heard Lily tell Daniel, in a carrying whisper, that she was very hungry and had the morning been real or a dream. She stopped walking. She turned around. She had no fully rational explanation for what she said next. "Would you both like to get lunch?" "There's a place a few blocks from here, nothing formal." "I'd like to buy it. Consider it part of the apology." Daniel looked at her with an expression she would come to recognize as his default assessment face a level. Unhurried gaze that did not rush to judgment in either direction. "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to." Another pause. Lily was already looking between the two adults with the poorly concealed impatience of someone who has been informed she is hungry and wishes the relevant parties would reach a conclusion. "Okay," Daniel said. "Thank you." The Cabot Street Cafe was a small place with mismatched chairs, a chalkboard menu, and a window that looked out onto a stretch of common with a good angle on the pond. It smelled of coffee and wood smoke and something baking. It was entirely unlike anywhere Victoria usually ate lunch. Lily ordered a grilled cheese and tomato soup with the decisive authority of someone who had given this menu significant prior consideration. Daniel ordered a turkey sandwich. Victoria, looking at a menu she genuinely didn't have opinions about, ordered soup. They sat for a moment in the particular silence of 3 people who have been through something unusual together and are not yet sure what they are to each other in the aftermath. Then Lily said to Victoria, "Do you have a job?" "I do." "What kind?" "I invest money. I help decide where money should go so it can grow." Lily absorbed this. "Like planting?" Victoria looked at her. "Yes," she said, and was surprised to mean it. "Exactly like planting." Daniel watched this exchange with the quiet attentiveness of a parent who knows when to let his child lead. He had a way of holding himself at rest, not checked out, not absent, but genuinely present without pressing for control of the conversation. It was unusual. In Victoria's professional life, almost no one rested. Everyone was always slightly performing. "How long have you been doing HVAC?" she asked, because she'd heard Catherine Morell mention it. 9 years. Started as an apprentice right out of vocational school. He broke a corner off his sandwich. "People think it's unglamorous, but there's something satisfying about a system that works. You go in and something's broken and wrong and too hot or too cold and uncomfortable, and when you leave it's right again. That feels like something." "It is something," she said. And then, without planning to, "I haven't fixed anything tangible in a very long time." He looked at her, not with pity, not with judgment, with recognition. "That probably gets lonely," he said. Victoria took a sip of her soup. She did not answer immediately. Outside the window, a group of pigeons were having some kind of territorial negotiation near the bench by the pond. Lily had noticed them and was watching with professional interest. "Yes," Victoria said finally, "it does. Boston Common and vicinity, October and November. They did not plan to see each other again. Or rather, neither of them articulated a plan. But Boston had a way of making itself small when it wanted to, and Lily had, in passing, mentioned that she and her father walked through the Common on Saturday mornings if the weather held. The following Saturday, Victoria happened to be running, or rather, she told herself she happened to be running in that particular direction, through that particular section of the park, at that particular hour, and she ran past a man and a small girl feeding breadcrumbs to the pigeons, and she slowed to a stop because the small girl saw her first and waved with the complete absence of self-consciousness that belongs only to children and very confident adults. She sat down on the bench. The three of them spent 40 minutes feeding the ducks at the pond, with Lily providing detailed commentary on the social hierarchy of the birds based on observations she had made over what she said were many weeks of research. Her analysis had a rigor that made Victoria suspect she might eventually go into systems thinking, or ecology, or both. The following week, Victoria had a meeting that should have kept her in the office through Saturday morning. She rescheduled it to Monday without examining her reasons in detail. Over the weeks that followed, something gradual and slightly embarrassing happened to Victoria Langston. She started to want to be somewhere other than where she usually was. This was new. For years, the next meeting, the next quarter, the next acquisition target had been the magnetic north of her attention. Now, she found herself, at the tail end of a Thursday evening reviewing comps, thinking about a conversation she'd had on a park bench about whether ducks had preferences. She and Daniel fell into a loose, largely unspoken routine. Saturday mornings, sometimes a midweek evening at a coffee shop on Tremont Street called Parchment, which had deep chairs and weak overhead lighting and did not play music at a volume that prevented conversation. They talked about things that had nothing to do with money. He told her about the particular satisfactions and frustrations of his work, the old systems and the new ones, the clients who trusted him and the ones who didn't, the way his late wife had always asked him to explain exactly what he'd fixed each day because she said it was the most satisfying kind of story. She told him things she hadn't told many people, that she had started her firm partly because a former supervisor had told her, with genuine conviction, that women investors made decisions too emotionally, and that she had spent 15 years since proving him wrong by being the most precise person in every room, and had occasionally wondered whether she had overcorrected. That her apartment, which had featured in a design magazine, felt like a place she visited rather than a place she lived. He listened to this the way he listened to everything, without rushing it toward a conclusion, without offering a fix before she'd finished the diagnosis. "You don't have to keep being the proof," he said once, on a Tuesday evening when the cafe was nearly empty. "Whatever you were trying to prove, the work did it. You don't have to maintain it as a permanent posture." She didn't respond to this immediately. She looked at her coffee cup. Then she said, "That's the most useful thing anyone has said to me in years." "It's what I'd say to a system that was overworking itself," he said. "Sometimes they run hot because they were set up to compensate for a problem that doesn't exist anymore." She laughed. She hadn't laughed freely in a professional context in a very long time, and this wasn't a professional context. And the laugh surprised her with its own fullness. Daniel looked at her with the slight warmth of a man who was pleased to have caused something uncomplicated. It was in this period that Victoria also began to know Lily properly, not as the charming accessory to the man she was spending time with, but as herself a person of distinct texture and genuine viewpoint. Lily had opinions about everything. the proper way to layer a grilled cheese on both interior sides to prevent sogginess, the unfairness of squirrel hierarchies, the best direction to face when watching the sunset from the common hill. She was generous and exacting in equal measure, which Victoria recognized as a rare combination. Lily, for her part, regarded Victoria with an appraising intelligence that was occasionally unnerving. One Saturday, as they were watching the geese from the bridge, Lily said to her father, not quite quietly enough, "Daddy, Victoria is nice, but she doesn't know how to not be in charge." Daniel covered a smile. Victoria said, "That's fair." Lily looked at her, reassessing. "You're also getting better," Lily added, with the generosity of a fair judge. Victoria thought that was possibly the most honest and useful performance review she had ever received. November into December, the common in the last of the leaves. The trees had nearly finished. The oaks held on longest, their bronze and copper surviving into November in a last show of resistance before the cold stripped them back to structure. The pond had a skin of ice some mornings. The park felt different, quieter, more honest, like a room after all the furniture has been rearranged and you finally see the shape of the walls. Victoria had started coming to the park not just on Saturdays, but sometimes alone, in the early morning, before the day assembled itself into obligation. She walked the same paths she walked with Daniel and Lily. She was not sure, entirely, what she was doing. She was not a person who usually needed to think, in the sense of unstructured thought. She was a person who analyzed. Unstructured thought was a kind of inefficiency she had historically discouraged in herself. But something had shifted in her architecture. She had spent a long time building walls that were meant to signal capability. What she was discovering, with the slow surprise of structural reckoning, was that they had also been insulating her from the ordinary warmth of things, from the conversation that went sideways into something better than where it was headed, from the child who said unguarded things, from the man who fixed broken systems and had apparently, without intending to, identified that she was one. She didn't examine this too closely. She was a person who had learned that some processes work better when not over-monitored. Daniel, for his own part, was navigating something he hadn't anticipated navigating. The trust, once verified and properly administered by Anderson Whitfield, meant that the rent notice and the credit card and the thin waterproofing on the kitchen window were no longer the edge of a cliff they had been. He paid off the credit card in full. He renewed the lease, but began, with the measured deliberateness of someone still slightly disbelieving their own circumstances, to think about whether Dunmore Street was where he and Lily should spend the next chapter. He did not leave his job. He had considered it. Pete had given him an uncertain but genuine congratulations when Daniel, eventually, told him what had happened. But the work was still the work. And the work was still satisfying, and he was not a man who confused having resources with having a reason to stop doing the thing that gave his days a shape. He did, however, start leaving work at a more consistent hour. He took Lily to her first real concert, a children's symphony at Jordan Hall, that she sat through with complete concentration and then pronounced excellent but too formal, a critique the program notes would not have predicted. He bought her a book on ornithology after the pigeon taxonomy sessions, which she read with the focused hunger of a mind that had found a groove. One evening in late November, the three of them were in the Cabot Street Cafe again. The temperature outside had dropped seriously, and the windows were fogged at the edges. Lily had been doing homework at one end of the table with the focused exclusion of someone who considers adult conversation a background event, and Daniel and Victoria had been talking for 2 hours without either of them fully tracking the time. There was a pause. Not an uncomfortable pause, one of those pauses that exists because something is present in it. Victoria was looking out the window. She said, without quite looking at him, "I think the thing about you is that you are genuinely at ease with yourself. I've spent a long time in rooms full of very successful people, and almost none of them have that." "I'm not sure that's a virtue," he said. "I think I just ran out of energy to be otherwise." "That's still something. plenty of people have boundless energy for performance. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Victoria, can I ask you something directly? Yes. Do you know what this is? Because I think I know what this is, and I want to make sure I'm not reading it incorrectly. Victoria turned from the window. She looked at him. Outside, a light snow had begun, not committing to anything, just a light preliminary snow, the kind that coats the benches and melts by morning. I think you're reading it correctly, she said. Lily, at the other end of the table, did not look up from her math worksheet, but a small smile appeared on her face with the quiet inevitability of someone who had seen this coming for several weeks. Boston Common, the following October. A year had passed. The Common had cycled back through its seasons, winter's stripped architecture, the tentative green of early spring, the full canopy of summer. And now October again, with its annual extravagance of red and orange and gold, the trees performing their annual extravagance, leaves coming loose in the wind and drifting down to the paths in slow spinning arcs. It was a Saturday morning. The sky was the particular blue that arrives in New England autumns, a blue with no compromise in it, clear all the way to nothing. They were back at the bridge over the pond. The ducks had returned, or perhaps they had never left. Lily was engaged in ongoing debate with herself about whether they were the same ducks or new ducks, a question she had been investigating with characteristic rigor. She was 7 now. She had opinions that had become, if possible, more precisely articulated and more confidently deployed. She was also carrying a small bunch of yellow roses, which she had selected herself at the flower cart near the park entrance, informing the vendor with some authority that yellow roses meant friendship and joy, and also she liked the color. Daniel and Victoria were standing on the bridge. They had been standing there for a minute without speaking, which they were good at now, the comfortable silence of two people who have enough history to know that not all of it needs to be narrated in real time. Then Daniel said, "I've been thinking about what to say. I've been thinking about it for a while. And," Victoria said, "and I keep coming back to the same thing." He turned toward her. "Which is that the day I walked into that bank, I came because Sarah left me a door. She knew things were going to be hard, and she built something quiet and permanent, and she left it for me and Lily to find. And I walked through that door, and I found." He stopped. "I found more than I was looking for." Victoria was looking at him with the expression she had, the one where the precision had given way to something that didn't have a professional vocabulary, something she'd had to develop new language for over the course of the past year. "Daniel," she said, "I know you're not someone who does things halfway," he said. "I know what you've built. I know how you're made. I'm not asking you to be something different. I'm asking if you'd want to build something with me. With us." He glanced back at Lily, who was feeding the ducks with the serious concentration of someone who takes resource allocation seriously. "If it makes sense to you. And I think it does. But I want to hear it from you." Victoria took a breath. The leaves were coming down around them in slow, unhurried spirals. A gust moved through the park, and the sound of it in the remaining canopy was like a held note, long and full. She thought about the woman she had been 1 year ago, standing in a marble lobby with a portable certainty about the worth of strangers. She thought about the version of herself that had laughed. She thought about what it had cost to walk across a floor and apologize, and how every good thing that had come afterward had started from that small, uncomfortable act. She thought about Lily, who would be, she suspected, one of the most interesting people she would ever know, holding yellow roses and managing the diplomatic complexities of duck feeding. She thought about the way Daniel listened, about the system that was overworking itself, and what it had felt like to have someone see that without flinching. "Yes," she said, "it makes sense to me." He smiled, not the tentative half-smile she had seen in the bank, the one with all its defenses in place, the full one, the one she had been watching emerge, degree by degree, over 12 months of parks and coffee shops and long evenings and small, honest conversations. Lily had arrived beside them, apparently having concluded the duck feeding to her satisfaction. She looked at the two of them with the calm assessment of someone for whom this outcome had been obvious for some time. "Are you two done talking about important things?" she asked. "I think so," Daniel said. Lily held out one of the yellow roses she had kept a few separate from the bunch and offered it to Victoria with a formality that was simultaneously 7 years old and entirely sincere. "From me and Mama," she said. Victoria took the rose. She did not perform composure. She didn't need to. "Thank you, Lily," she said. They stood on the bridge in the October light. The leaves came down. The ducks made their opinions known. A couple, walking a large, philosophical-looking dog, passed behind them, and the dog stopped to examine the bridge railing with the intensity of an inspector. It was, by any measure, an ordinary Saturday morning in an ordinary public park, except that it wasn't. It was the morning that followed a year of unlikely, slow, genuine reconstruction of a man learning that love does not end when the person who gave it to you is gone, that it persists in the things they built for you, in the rooms they arranged so you could find your way. Of a woman learning that the walls she had constructed in the name of capability had been solving for a problem she no longer had, and of a small girl learning what her mother had perhaps always known, which was that the most important things happen when someone does something generous without expecting to be seen. The trees were full of it, that light, that gold, that red. The bank card was still in Daniel's wallet. He carried it not because he needed to, but because it was the last practical object that Sarah had touched and arranged and set aside for him, and because objects that have been held by people we loved take on their own kind of weight. He thought about her often, and not with the particular grief he had carried for 2 years after she died. The grief that had no bottom. This was a different kind of remembering, one that had room in it for gratitude, for the warm shape of who she had been, for the knowledge that she had seen him clearly and loved him anyway, and planned for him with the quiet ferocity of someone who knew that love is not only a feeling but an architecture. He thought, she would have liked Victoria. She would have recognized, immediately, the woman who existed on the other side of the defenses, and she would have been characteristically impatient with the defenses and characteristically patient with the woman. She would have liked Lily's rose, he thought. She knew what she was doing. Lily was telling Victoria about her theory that the duck near the rock was the same duck from last October, and she could prove it by a distinctive pattern on its wing, which she had documented in a small notebook she had begun keeping for the purpose. Victoria was listening to this with the full attention she brought to things she found genuinely interesting, which was the same attention she brought to the duck documentation as to a financial prospectus, because she had discovered, in the past year, that the discipline of real attention did not distinguish between what was conventionally important and what was quietly worth noticing. That was perhaps the thing she would remember most when she thought about who she had become on the other side of a Wednesday morning in October, when she had laughed at a man in a canvas jacket and then spent the rest of her life making good on the correction that she had learned to look. The leaves continued to fall. The light was extraordinary. A family stood on a bridge in Boston Common, in the middle of an ordinary Saturday, in the company of ducks and documentation and yellow roses. And the autumn, which had started everything, carried on doing what autumn does, letting things go, making way, filling the air with the smell of something ending and something quietly beginning.